Elvis Presley's granddaughter, Riley Keough, is opening up about her plans for Graceland and a promise to her mother.
There's a staircase at Graceland that millions of people have walked past, looked at, and wondered about, but never climbed. Not a single public visitor, not a journalist, not a documentary crew, not even the most devoted Elvis Presley fan who has made the pilgrimage to Memphis from the other side of the world has ever been permitted to set foot on those steps and cross into the second floor of the most famous private home in American music history. For 47 years, that upper level has remained locked, silent, and sealed. And for 47 years, the world has been left to wonder what lies beyond that forbidden threshold. But something has changed. Riley Keough, actress, daughter of the late Lisa Marie Presley, and granddaughter of the king of rock and roll himself, has stepped forward. As the current owner and guardian of the Graceland estate, Riley now carries the full weight of one of the most powerful cultural legacies in American history. And for the first time, she is speaking, not to sensationalize, not to sell tickets, but to share what she believes the world deserves to understand about the man who built his kingdom on that quiet stretch of Memphis land, and who spent his final years retreating further and further into the private world of his upper rooms. What she reveals is not a scandal. It is something more complicated, more human, and in many ways more heartbreaking than any conspiracy theory could ever be. It is a story of a man trapped by his own greatness, searching desperately for peace in a world that would not stop watching him. To understand why the upstairs of Graceland carries such extraordinary weight, you first have to understand what Graceland itself meant, and still means, to the people who love Elvis Presley. The estate sits on Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis, Tennessee, and today it draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. It is the second most visited private home in the United States, surpassed only by the White House. That fact alone tells you something remarkable about the way this house has embedded itself into the American imagination. Elvis purchased Graceland in 1957 for just over $100,000. He was 22 years old, already famous beyond measure, and already exhausted by what fame demanded of him. The house was not the grandest property he could have afforded, but it offered something more valuable than square footage. It offered distance from the noise. Surrounded by fields on the outskirts of Memphis, it felt, at least for a brief time, like somewhere he could breathe. Over the following 2 decades, Elvis transformed Graceland into an expression of everything he was: bold, unconventional, deeply personal, and occasionally bewildering to outsiders. He installed shag carpet on the ceiling of the jungle room, built a racquetball court on the grounds, and designed a meditation garden out back that would eventually become his final resting place. The house grew with him, changed with him, and ultimately absorbed him. By the early 1970s, Elvis was rarely leaving Graceland at all. The world had shrunk to those walls, and eventually it shrank further still to the rooms upstairs. That upper floor was always different. Downstairs was performance. Downstairs was a den where he entertained guests, the kitchen where his famous peanut butter and banana sandwiches were made, the rooms that eventually became part of the public tour that opened to visitors in 1982. But upstairs was private. Upstairs was where Elvis actually lived. It was his bedroom, his reading room, his bathroom, and toward the end of his life, the almost exclusive territory of a man who had pulled so far back from the public world that he had essentially disappeared while still being alive. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of his upstairs suite. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, complicated by years of prescription drug dependency and the physical toll of a body that had been pushed well beyond its limits. By that afternoon, news of his death had spread around the globe. By that evening, fans had begun gathering outside the gates of Graceland in the thousands, weeping, singing, leaving flowers pressed against the iron fence. Inside the house, a different kind of grief was taking hold. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, made a decision in the days that followed that would shape the story of Graceland for the next half-century. He ordered the second floor sealed, not cleaned out, not renovated, not preserved in any institutional sense, simply closed. The door at the top of the staircase was locked, and the rooms were left exactly as they were on the last morning Elvis Presley was alive. Vernon's reasoning was not complicated. He could not bring himself to disturb the space where his son had lived. For a grieving father, those rooms were not memorabilia, they were presents. The silk sheets on the bed, the book stacked on a nightstand, the reading glasses left on an open page, the bottles of medication still sitting where Elvis had placed them. All of it together created something that felt, even in his absence, inhabited. To clear out would have been to accept something Vernon was not ready to accept. That decision passed from Vernon to Lisa Marie when she inherited the estate after her father's death in 1979. And from Lisa Marie, the decision passed to Riley Keough when Lisa Marie died in January 2023. 3 generations of the Presley family have maintained the same quiet commitment. Those rooms stay closed. Those rooms stay sacred. Riley Keough grew up knowing Graceland the way most people know their grandparent homes, as a place layered with memory, full of corners that held stories, saturated with a particular smell and light of somewhere that mattered deeply. But Graceland was also unlike any other grandparent's home in the world. It was simultaneously a family sanctuary and a global icon, which created an unusual tension that Riley has described as something she has spent her life learning to navigate. As a child, she visited often. She played in the downstairs rooms while public tours moved through the same hallways. And sometimes carefully, she slipped upstairs. She was always told not to touch anything. But she looked. She absorbed. She carried those images with her into adulthood, never quite knowing what to do with them, and never quite able to let them go. After her mother's death and after the legal complexities surrounding the Graceland Trust were settled, including a dispute with her grandmother Priscilla Presley that was resolved privately, Riley found herself in full ownership of the estate. She was 34 years old, responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in property and intellectual property, and suddenly the sole guardian of a legacy that belongs not just to her family, but, in some profound sense, to the world. She has described the feeling as both clarifying and overwhelming. For the first time, the question of what to do with Graceland, and specifically with what lay upstairs, was entirely hers to answer, and her answer has been careful, measured, and deeply thoughtful. She would not open the rooms. She would not allow cameras inside. But she would begin, for the first time, to talk about what was in there. The picture Riley paints of the upstairs at Graceland is not what conspiracy theorists have imagined. It is not a vault of dark secrets or hidden evidence of fake deaths. It is something quieter and, in its own way, far more affecting. It is the private interior of a man who was one of the most watched human beings on the planet, and who spent the last years of his life constructing the most intimate possible refuge from that relentless gaze. Elvis's bedroom remains dressed in the same silk sheets that were on the bed when he died. On one nightstand sits a Bible, its margins filled with his own handwriting, notes, underlined passages, questions scrawled in the margins as though he were arguing with the text itself. On the other nightstand sit prescription medication bottles, some still with pills inside, untouched for nearly 5 decades. The clock above the bed stopped, or was stopped at the time paramedics arrived. Whether this was intentional or coincidental, no one in the family has ever said. Adjacent to the bedroom is what Riley calls a personal study, a small, wood panel room that most visitors to Graceland have never heard of and will never see. The walls are lined with books on subjects that reveal the breadth and intensity of Elvis's private intellectual life. Numerology, Christian theology, Eastern philosophy, the paranormal, the Kabbalah, the teachings of various spiritual teachers he had encountered over the years. Elvis was, by many accounts, a deeply restless spiritual seeker, someone who found no single tradition fully satisfying and who kept reaching for something he seemed unable to name. The books in the study tell that story more honestly than any authorized biography ever has. Among the books are notebooks filled with Elvis's own handwriting. Riley has described these as among the most remarkable things she has encountered in that space. Some entries read like prayers, earnest, searching, occasionally desperate. Others contain fragments of song lyrics that were never finished, melodic ideas that were apparently captured in words and then abandoned. One page, she has recalled, was filled with a single word written over and over in large letters, the word free with a question mark. The image is both simple and devastating. Among the most significant discoveries Riley has spoken about is a shoebox that was found stored beneath Elvis's bed. The box was labeled with 2 words, "Do not open." Inside were letters, handwritten letters, never sent, addressed to people Elvis apparently could not bring himself to contact directly. One was addressed to his daughter, Lisa Marie, who was 9 years old when he died. Another was addressed simply to whoever finds this after I'm gone. Riley has made clear that she will not be releasing the contents of these letters publicly. They are, she says, too personal, too raw, and too private to be turned into exhibits or talking points. But she acknowledges that they exist, and that reading them changed the way she understands her grandfather. The man who emerges from those pages is not the sequin performer of the Las Vegas years, not the hip-shaking revolutionary of the 1950s, but something more fragile and more recognizable, a person who was frightened, who was isolated, who loved people he struggled to reach, and who was aware, in some painful and clear-eyed way, that things had gone wrong. The bathroom where Elvis died remained sealed in a state of complete preservation. Riley will not describe it in detail, and this seems right. It is not a place that needs to be described. She confirms only that nothing has been changed or removed, and that the family treats a room with the same reverence one would extend to any sacred space. For the Presley family, this is not a crime scene or a curiosity. It is the last room where Elvis Presley was alive, and it deserves to be treated accordingly. One detail that Riley has shared stands apart from everything else. At the far end of the upstairs hallway, tucked away from the bedroom and the study, is a room that has never appeared in any official Graceland literature, never been mentioned in any documentary, and was completely unknown to the public until Riley spoke about it. She calls it the quiet